Hello, I think it's kind of interesting time. We are on actually around 10 p.m. in US now. Is that correct? So it's about 11 a.m. here in Australia now. So
yeah, and we're still asleep in India and some of Asia. So our audience this morning was quite large, maybe 3.5 times this size, because everybody was awake for about 3 hours together.
cool. So I do hope everyone did actually pay attention to George, and that's actually one of the reasons I did ask George to stay on the call, because pretty much I think what I'm gonna do here is think about what you just did. Watch George showing about implementing Kubernetes, implementing containers. It doesn't matter if you're doing this in AKS or if you do this on-prem or whatever. So this session will be about what security considerations should we take on board. And I want you to rephrase the word consideration instead of recommendation or best practice. And you see the reason why I am using the word consideration. For those who doesn't know me, I work for Microsoft as an architect based in Australia. I used to be a Microsoft MVP for almost 10 years before joining Microsoft. And in my line of work, currently for the past almost 4 years, I work with enterprise and financial and government sectors, and working from deploying Kubernetes, migrating customers to the cloud, providing security advice, identity, and so on. So that's pretty much my line of field. And because of the difference in each customer environment, and that's the reason I want us to think about consideration instead of recommendation, because it's very clear to me that one thing doesn't fit other. And when I'm saying this is one environment is not equal the other. There is no recommendation that I can tell you that will fit all environments. That's why I want to use as a consideration, so you can see if everything that I'm going to put forward, what actually fits into your environment, what actually actions you need to take to make your Kubernetes or your containers secure. I hope it does make sense to everyone. So let's start with some of the CSO challenges, right? The key taking point here is that we can't take the traditional security practices and apply them into a container system. When we move to a container and microservices architecture, we need to think about what new things have been introduced into the security, and what else we need to consider, what extra tools or extra attacks that will be as a result of this new technology. One of the big changes I see happening when I engage with customers is this whole shift to the left, and developers being more in charge nowadays, and they've been requesting me new features, and the infrastructure team having to always now be ahead of the curve, instead of before the infrastructure was dictating all the settings. I see this a lot of change now, the developers driving behavior, which is a good thing. But at the same time, it brings security issues to the environment, and we need to deal with that. So this is a survey that was done back in 2008 and 2009, and we see here that one of the big concerns and issues we see more and more happening is misconfigurations and exposures. And that is a result, for example, of us writing code and not properly scanning the code, or exposing secrets in the code, or maybe not even having unit tests. And you say, oh, that's not possible. Or I can tell you, definitely it's possible, and I see this many times where code is being brought into production without proper tests, without considering exposure of secrets or even having credentials in the code. But yeah, and the other one as well is if we consider the life cycle is not only about build but and deployment, but if you see here, one of the big ones is also runtime. So as I am already in the runtime, what should I be worried about? What should I implement to make sure that my solution is secure? So for those who after wants to have more in deep content. So this I did post here the AKAMS AKS best practice security best practice session. Sorry, there is a lot of content there. I do recommend you to go and have a look. So I'm gonna start this session with this. So it's kind of interesting when we talk about security with different layers and at the same time in different customer size. But one thing in common is, and that's what I want to ask here, and I'm sure everyone would know the answer for this, is what do we have in common between under engagement and undergarment, sorry, and with password and credentials? So I just give you guys 5 minutes to 5 seconds to think about, but it's very simple, right? One, keep them private. Do not share with anyone. Change them often, and always go for the high quality materials. What is more interesting when I say this is doesn't matter how much time you talk about this and you still see this happening. I see many times when I go to customers, for example, and they have these segregated environments with dev, test, production, GR, how many times, and they keep saying that they implemented this security by segregating, but they allow, and it's kind of difficult as well. If you ask majority of those developers or people who have privileged accounts, if they use the same password across those environments, they will lie to you. They say no, but underneath they all use the same password. So that is kind of thinking like it's humans, right? We need to think about this. It's not just about uh, just reading acknowledge. It's taking action, right? Very few of us, even in the security field, uh, would take the actually right action. So I hope we learn from what's happening around the world in terms of people stealing accounts, stealing money, getting access to our data. But we do take this serious. So I actually like this, what Microsoft team have done. So I did put here the link for this attack matrix. This is a really nice overview of a attack matrix, and is actually based on the ATT-CK. Like I'll just cover some of this, but the link is here. I definitely recommend you guys should have a look. So let's just go and discuss some. If we think about the initial access, for example, that is a tactic that consists of techniques that are used to gain access to a resource. So if we think on a container environment, so this can this type of techniques is like to enable the first access to the cluster. So this access can be achieved, by directly via the cluster management layer or gaining access to a malicious or vulnerable resource that is deployed on the cluster. So another one we can think about, let's say a compromised image in the register, means that we are running a image that has been compromised or a image that is not coming from a trusted register. So it could be two things. That the attacker could have compromise it, the register, your private register, for example, or it could be that the developer download the image from a untrusted public register. And I can tell you that a lot of people do that. So how can we then, we need to make sure that we have our register protected. So we're going to discuss this, some of these techniques later. So another one we can think about, let's say, let's take one here, kubeconfig file, for example, which is used by kubectl. It contains details about your Kubernetes cluster, include location, credentials. So if this cluster is hosted, for example, in AKS, and this file is downloaded via client, for example, I think George did run that command, like AZ, AKS, get credential. If the attack get access to this file, it could actually compromise, it can actually get access to the cluster and compromise it. Another one we can think about, let's take here, another one that's common as well, SSH server running inside of a containers. Maybe your developer choose to deploy a SSH server inside of a container. So it also means that it can be used by attackers. So if I get valid credential to a container, I can whatever, by using brute force attempt or phishing, then I can get remote access to the container by using this SSH server. What else I can think about? It's cluster admin binding, for example. It's another one. We need to make sure that we understand that RBAC is a key security, in Kubernetes. And when I talk to customers, they still have customers that don't get it. That how important is to have a strong role-based access in place. You need to think about the model that you are creating for your RBAC. Giving everyone contributor access or giving everyone, admin access, it's a nonsense. So why you have an RBAC model? So you need to think about this. So RBAC can restrict and the actions, so which is very good. So you can have actions for various identities in the cluster, and you can give permissions based on what the person really needs. Really back to the Windows time is give the privilege that you need. Don't give broad privileges. So what else we can talk here? Container logs, it's another one. So attackers, they may have access, they can delete all the application logs or the OS logs and on any compromised container. So they have access, they can delete the logs and every trace that they actually ever was there. And that's a tricky one because they are not deleting their traces, but they are deleting change that they made. So it's a very important how to make sure your logs are also protected and how you keep the logging as a continual solution going on. More else, let's talk about another one like network mapping. So attackers may try to map the cluster network to get information about the running applications. And then, they could, for example, scan for known vulnerabilities. So another thing is sometimes when we create our solution, we need to think about communications between pods. Is this something your solution needs? And we're actually going to talk a little bit about later of solutions that you can put in place to make that happen, or maybe in your case, it doesn't need that. But it's an important consideration that you need to think about. Think like if a attacker get access to a single container, it may use it to probe the network and then get access to other containers. It also means when we talk about this, even for internal cluster networking as well. So that is an important thing that we need to consider. Lastly, let's just get another one. Let's say resource hijacking, where the attacker may abuse the compromised resource and running tasks. And one of these, for example, one example is this, digital currency mining, like crypto mining, and they have access to this container, and then when they have permission, they create new containers, then they run the activities in your containers, for example, and you have no idea that they are running there. So in the next slide, what I just capture here, and I am always mentioning the sources, is a very, very good point. You guys have a look on this later, is like an overview of all the measures we could have in place if we think about what we just discussed in the previous slide. For example, with a firewall where we can control the outbound traffic, a east and west traffic segmentation, for example, using network policies or service mesh, encryption between pods, insights about your applications. Are you capturing that, or even logging from a infrastructure perspective as well? Are you making sure you're capturing that? Your secrets, are you keeping them on a key vault? For example, are you making sure they are protected? We having a security governance in place with SIEM integration. Doesn't matter if it's security center or any other solution that you have as a SIEM solution, but it's one of the things you need to consider as well. Network flow, making sure we have resource using services endpoints, or now as we have private endpoint. If you need, for example, a private AKS environment, think about using private endpoints, making sure we have solutions in place to scan the register. That is very, very important. And securing the AKS with a very strong identity and RBAC model. So I think this picture shows an overview of measures that can take place. It does not mean, and I hope you don't think this is, oh, I need to implement all of this. Again, take this as a consideration. You need to think about your environment and what is required by your environment. So let's just go a little bit more in detail in some of those things that we just discussed. So if you think about cluster isolation and resource management. So let's think about what I just discussed before, that we have customers, or there are places where I need physical isolation. So I need to have a dev cluster, I need to have a staging cluster, a prod, or SIT, or DR, or whatever name you want to call, but you need to have it isolated. So you can actually create this, right? And then we have places where instead of going through that division as one cluster for each environment, I may have a solution where instead of giving this, because if we think the previous one, if you think this way here, for every application team, we would have 4 of those, right? But if we move to another pattern, let's say where I have a dev cluster or production cluster or SIT cluster, and I have each team having a logical isolation, like pods, each nodes for a particular team, or whatever, this dev, test, or prod cluster. So let's talk about those two here, and let's compare what I did here. I did a small comparison here. So if we think on port density, you think that from on a physical, we're gonna have port density low to medium, because now every team would have 4 clusters or whatever number of environments you have. If we go just dev and prod, we'll have at least 2 environments. Whereas in the logical, I have more port density, because now I have more teams sharing the same cluster. Costs, of course, because now the first one on the physical, I'm gonna build a number of clusters, and port density will be low, cost more is higher. From a Kubernetes experience, that's debatable. I put here as low to medium and logical medium to high, but again, it really depends on how you manage your environment. But it's of course it's clear that having each team having its own cluster, the experience is way better for them. From a security perspective, on the physical, the surfaces is more, whereas in the logical, as I put it, a star there, is kind of, you need to think about those environments. For example, although a pod can talk to a pod, I can implement solutions like service mesh that will bring the security to a point where one team would have restrictions, to access each other's and so on. But again, there'll be solutions where you actually need that. You actually need a solution where one team can use and consume each other's. And then from a management perspective, the owner is the team, and the other one is a cross-functional team you would need. If we think about the logical one, sorry, let's go back here. We would have someone to be managing the whole cluster, as opposed to the physical one, which each team would have its own cluster. So let's here. So what considerations should we then think about from a cluster isolation? So my take on this is think about sensitivity of the workload, cost, operations model, and try to think from a pattern, because that is important. Like, I have customers who actually have the same type of business, but because of the way they manage the environment, and they actually have each one use a different pattern. Like when went through a pattern where they isolated each team in its own cluster, whereas the other went to a single cluster for different asset teams. So uh, it really depends on your environment. Make sure you use namespace, even in physical isolation. So never use the full namespace or production workloads, and apply resource quotas. That's very important. If you think about costs, is to make sure that the resource quotas are there. Networking, that's a very interesting one. I actually just published today that Hashicorp just make available console as a service for AKS. I hope some of you saw, but I will talk a little bit later on this. Considerations that we need to think. So AKS, it needs a public IP for ingress. Internal peer egress is sourced from the host, not for the load balance. Things that we need to think about is please do not modify the AKS and SG manually. Use different ingress subnet for internal and lock down with an SG. Use load balance. As you can see on this diagram here, it's a very common deployment for containers. This is considering, let me just minimize this so I can see the whole. sorry, better. Where I have my VNet, and inside of that VNet, I'll have my AKS cluster running, and then again, you need to think about if this is the right model for you. As you can see on this model here, I'm not using private endpoint, private link, so it means I'm not doing a talking to the AKS via private IP. So how can I then isolate workloads against each other? So I would say we can go many different ways. It depends on who you talk. You would have different solutions for this question. Here is just some of examples, right? You can use, for example, Azure Network Policies, which allows you to describe who is allowed to talk with whom based on tags. We can use Calico Network Policies. That's as an open source. We can use Cilium. There are many other ways of achieving that. This model here, though, does not encrypt the communication between ports. If this is a requirement in your solution that you must encrypt, because I do have customers that have that requirement where they need to encrypt the traffic between ports. So how I do that? So that is what I'm talking here now. So that comes a solution where unfortunately it gets more complex. So it means I need to go to an extra level in my network and go with a service mesh solution. That means I'm going now to encrypt the communications and control access, with mutual TLS. That is, routing traffic is transparent. I can manage the traffic and manipulate it. I can enable metric collection, very important. I just put here two solutions, but there are many other solutions. One I didn't mention here, for example, Linkerd. It's another one. But we have Istio, we have Consul. I would say the biggest difference between many of those, and you need to consider, is even though many of those do encrypt the traffic and they are service mesh, they have some characteristics. You need to think, for example, do you need to encrypt the traffic between pods on different clusters, or your solution only need to cater for that particular cluster? Like you only want to encrypt the traffic within a cluster. So that is what you need to also think about when you're designing your solution. Look, it's still very important that when we talk about moving to to Kubernetes containers, that we still need to do design. I've heard many times when I talk with some customers that they want to go directly to do a deployment without thinking about how they're going to deploy it. And after they deploy, they realize, oh, then we need to go back to the drawing to understand what actually we're trying to achieve, what are the requirements for this solution. So my recommendation is we still need to do design. Definitely, it's a very important task before we go into the deployment. And it doesn't mean you cannot do a POC to try out some of the solutions like Istio, Consul, Linkerd, or Azure Network Policies. It doesn't matter what solution you're going through. Design is still required. This one here that I just put about HCS is actually just became available in the market. Is a offering that you can take from Hashicorp. Is a PaaS service for Consul. It's another one. It means you don't need to build the solution and managing the service mesh solution. Trust me, it's quite elaborate, but again, some people would like to do things manually. Again, when it comes to securing Kubernetes, another thing we need to think about is the firewall, right? And we do have solutions like WAF. Here is just an example of how you could be deploying application gateway in your network to make sure you are protecting your nodes. Just again, think about that attack model when you are doing your design, and consider what solutions do I need to think about and put in place to make sure those doesn't occur in my, or minimize that, because trust me, someone is trying to hack into your solution. If you are not protected, what we need to do is just make sure we make it harder for them. From another solution here is from a management perspective. So think about, you put all the measures in place, but then you access your environment from a compromised desktop or from a compromised computer. So every other measure that you put in place just went down because your computer has been compromised. You use your computer for browsing the internet, accessing mail, accessing Facebook, and then suddenly you just download a image. I don't know. I actually like a movie. I was watching someone trying to hack each other. They befriend that person on Facebook and sent a image to a cat, and that person loved a cat. He clicked on the picture from the cat, and then suddenly his computer got compromised. It's actually totally possible. It's definitely, and I see this happening. Unfortunately, I can't talk about the case, but it was definitely a happened with one person that I know, and it's so. What I'm saying is, how can you make sure that you protect what you just built with care and making sure it's secure? You implemented all the measures, you implement private link, you implemented a firewall, we implemented encryption between pods, you implemented an RBAC model. And so this solution here is what we call, it's a bastion host. It means in order for me to manage my solution, I need to connect to this solution by using SSH, for example. And from that is my secure desktop to manage my solution. Bastion host is just one of the ways of doing this. By using Bastion hosts, I would say the advantage is you don't need to create what we call a POR, which is a privileged desktop. I do have customers who decided to go with Bastion hosts. I have customers who decide to have a separated desktop, one desktop for normal user, another desktop when you actually need to manage your solution. Again, it really, again, same thing. It's just a consideration that you need to think about what fits in your environment. Do I need a separated desktop, or do I need a solution where I can log on to this, and then from there it's actually my secure desktop where I can actually develop solutions. It really depends how you manage and you develop things. So to summarize the networking, I'd say make sure you use advanced networking. Think about if you need service mesh, for example, use ingress and egress controllers for HTTP and HTTPS. Make sure you have application get or any other alternative to secure your services. Use Bastion hosts, or POR, privileged devices to make sure you connect, and make sure if you go on the POR device that you don't use those to browse internet, to access email. It really needs to be a lockdown device, because then it makes no sense. I just put some other final considerations, but this one here are more from a operational than actually from deployment. So make sure you define microservices connectivity as part of your CI/CD. Make sure you have baseline traffic patterns. Implement managed identity. It's another solution that went live. Make sure you have continuous compliance in place. It's important that a monitor is not a one-off. You keep that in place, and you make sure that if the attacker doesn't have access to go and clean that logs. From a host security, I did put some considerations here as well. And again, just based on that attack matrix that we discussed before, make sure we have hosts always updated. And that is something that we need to think about as well, is if we go with AKS, for example, AKS is a managed solution by Microsoft, but you still need to update the solution from time to time. So that is your responsibility. So you need to make sure that you keep that in mind. So how you're going to manage the updates, how you're going to keep monitoring it, and also understanding that you're going to have to restart once you have done the updates. Modify the host file. Don't do that. It's really bad idea. Make sure you prevent that. Make sure you prevent SSH. Make sure mounting host file is a security risk. Don't let containers do this. Container vulnerabilities could compromise the host. Make sure you watch for this as well. Look up for AppArmor and SecComp. Although I would say this, those tools are really great. It's manual labor that you need to put a lot of effort to make sure sorry, the configuration is correct. There are third-party tools in the market that can help you with that. Just to name a few, like Aqua, Prisma, which was acquired, and now it's called Prisma. Yeah, so there was another one, I forgot the name, but that, just to name a few. Actually, I remember the name. Stack Rocks. So it's just a few of the tools. There are many others that, and even open source tools that free that you could have a look on. Continuous compliance. Actually, Stack Rocks is just on the next slide. So how can we make sure that we identify and use continuous monitoring? So if you are deploying AKS out of the box, of course, there is a license there, but you can use Azure Security Center and Sentinel to make sure, for example, that we are looking for vulnerabilities in Kubernetes versions, that there is no, that we keep looking at the policies and the RBAC and suspicious mounting of the Azure JSON from containers. Now Azure Security Center now scan the image as well. It means if you can even lock, for example, the developer would only be able to use a particular image, like a particular register. They won't be able to use or download public image and use, and that you actually means you trusting what is in your register. Very important is, remember, if the image is compromised, as the developer use that image to create containers, everything is compromised. So from ground, you're zero, you're already compromised. Or crypto miners running your cluster, and even cluster admin role binds. I definitely recommend you to have a look on this by using Security Center, Sentinel, or even other solutions that I mentioned here, like Aqua, Prisma, StackRox, and there are many others. And this is some of those that I've seen my customers deploying. And that is, I would say there is no preference here. I do have a personal preference. I'm not going to talk here. But again, my recommendation is try them. See a comparison of them. You can find this on the internet, but try them. I think the best way of checking if it would fit, just try at least 2 of them. Another cool tool that it's available to diagnose Kubernetes cluster. It's Kubernetes Divisor. It returns the pods that are missing resources and request limits. It's a really nice tool. This is just a screenshot of that. You can use that to see it. It's capture saying, for example, resource limits missing, memory resource limits is missing. Remember when I mentioned earlier, you definitely need to make sure that you have resourcing quotas. Remember, we're giving that we can create unlimited nodes. And I remember one of you were asking George, how can I deploy more? Like, how can I scale the solution? So you're giving that without making sure that you're managing the quotas. It just sounds like a disaster when the bill comes. So I just put here a summary, and it's good that I'm on time. See, it's great. So make sure that we have a Active Directory authenticated containers. Use image scanning. That is very important for me. One of the biggest one is making sure that we have image scanners. And you see those two that I mentioned, they actually have different ways of working with that. Like some will scan the image on the register, some will go further, even making sure that the developer will at the start of the SDL, that the developer will be prevented choosing any other images. So again, different characteristics, different way of doing, but just good one. Node and cluster level security. Yeah, make sure you have patching. Make sure you monitor the patching. Make sure you have a monitoring place to make sure that when you restart or it tells you when to restart the nodes. Think about RBAC and Active Directory authentication. Control egress traffic. Find out if you need to deploy private link, for example. I don't know if you guys heard about private link. If you haven't, I definitely recommend you to look at private link. It's a way of creating a private Kubernetes cluster. From a pod level security, manage identity. That's also new. So it's a good way. It means I don't need to keep my user and password anymore. Now I think it's a service principal account. So it's a better way of working with identities. Make sure we use those pod identities to request access. Think about your CI/CD as well. Try to implement that as much as possible, and make sure you work with the administrator of the portal. Try to minimize using the portal. Try to use as much as possible as you can CI/CD. For my workload level security, one of the things that I forgot to add here, and is also very important, make sure the code that you are developing has been scanned as well. There are many solutions out there that can help you scan your code, because on top of everything we put in terms of security, if your code is not secure, well, we also compromise the whole solution. So make sure you secure access to resources using pod identity like Azure Key Vault. Make sure you use storage encryption. You can say, oh, that should be by default. Trust me, I've seen customers where I go and I do the initial assessment and storage encryption is not enabled. I don't understand why, but Make sure you have solutions like application gateway to protect, again, intrusion and other threats. Make sure you have traffic management, policy, strong identity, and monitoring. That is very important. And even think about if you actually need service mesh. Not everyone would need service mesh, but if you need, make sure you select the right solutions out of many that are out there. If you look at the slides that we presented, there are a few that I did mention, like Istio, Console, Linkerd, to name a few. I think that's it. This is just to make sure. I wanted to make sure we again go back to the quotas, and this aligned with the last question I was asked to George about. Hey, how can I make sure that I can, scale? Can definitely scale, especially on AKS. Make sure that you control the quotas, especially if you go in a model isolation where you have many teams sharing the same cluster. That's very important. Yeah. I'm just going to skip this because of the hours. Let me just go, sorry. I just mentioned this already. So there are 3 ones that I want to capture here. Is there any questions? We have like 10 minutes level. 10 minutes.
I was waiting for you to ask. Indeed,
Sorry.
we do. No worries. Great session. You and Jorge are disturbing my sleep with good information now. So I have a lot to think about tonight. So 2 questions right off the top here. You mentioned Calico and Cilium for network security. So which do you prefer and why is the question?
I knew that was gonna be. It's a very interesting one. I would say Microsoft has a better integration with Calico. So I'm a person, again, that's personal, okay? You ask a question I'm answering that as personal. I like to use as much as possible as to what the platform offers. I rather go with what the platform offers than using third-party solution. But again, this is me personal. I don't think that is right or wrong answer to this, which one is best. I'll keep saying this again. It depends on what you're looking for.
Now he's just being politically correct. So I think there is a right answer, and I think you just stated it. You prefer Calico because you prefer using what the platform offers, right?
Yeah, and then because in this case there is a better because the better integration with Azure Network, I would go with Calico. But again, it may not be the best for you.
Yeah, and we could have a similar discussion around Terraform, but that's we don't have that much time.
Let's skip that one.
So we have another question that looks very much like that one. For service mesh, Istio or Console, and why?
I'm suspect again on this one because I am actually working on a project in that I am recommending that solution, and I would recommend Console. The reason for this is service mesh is a very complex solution to put in place, and although I like both, the 2 reasons I am selecting Console for this particular scenario, again, it's very specific requirement. One is I need to have encryption between on the nodes between different clusters. And the other one is I don't want to manage the service mesh. I don't want to build the servers. I don't want to manage it. And because Console has a PaaS offering that we have this solution that I don't need to manage, like AKS, it just fits. But you could say, well, that's gonna be expensive. Then I prefer to use things that I can work from myself again. So that's exactly my point. I only had two requirements. Those two requirements didn't mention costs. The requirements were very simple. I don't want to build the solution. I don't want to manage the solution. And
I go the same.
Nice, nice.
I want to make sure that my pods between clusters, I'm not talking about within the same cluster, between clusters are encrypted. Just tick the box, the solution just tick the box.
Yeah, so let me throw something out there for your opinion, since I have two of the sort of innovators here. So when I look at the ecosystem around Kubernetes, what you just said about I like to use what the platform offers first, I find I'm very slow to go to any sort of open source community built on top of the platform, because I'm worried about the longevity of that solution. I'm putting another dependency in place that may not be very long lived, and it's hard for me to look at a technology that's 18 months or 2 years old and not profitable and not widely adopted, and wonder how bad would that mistake be, how tough would that be to back out if I jump on that bandwagon too early. So I found that many of these other components that aren't part of the platform, I've just not jumped on. And I'm wondering, how do you look at that when you're trying to solve problems? Do you stick pretty solidly to what's on the platform unless you must go outside, or how does it work?
It's a good question. I could, if you did ask me this 4 years ago,
Yep.
I would have a different opinion.
Okay.
I would say, what is the issue that I have today? Okay, as I work from a services division, like I am hired to provide a divisor to customers or to create solutions for them.
Okay.
If I choose to go with solutions that are not built into the platform or doesn't have support, it means that I'm leaving a solution for the customer to for him to figure out how to solve any issues after I left.
Okay.
And like, again, I always put that to the customer, because I do have customers that comes with the same question, and when I said this to them, they said, no worries, we actually have people here who can work that out. Like, I have a customer in Portugal that I was talking 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they all for using community code. And I see no issues on that, because they have a strong team that can manage it and support the solution. But you go with other customers where they see themselves more as the users of the solution, and in that case, having community code maintaining by it's not for them.
Okay.
Does it answer your question?
It does. It does. It's a very Microsoft answer. They've softened your opinions.
Oh,
But that's an answer. Let me just check the queue and see if any other questions. Yeah, so Manjit, I feel so Manjit's been on with us since the beginning. I feel like there's some special award that I need to do something special for you. So I tell you what, Alessandro, fantastic session.